The California sun was setting behind the SpaceX facility as Elon Musk rubbed his tired eyes. Another 18-hour workday was coming to an end, but the problems weren't. He glanced at the pile of reports on his desk: production delays at the Gigafactory, regulatory hurdles for Neuralink, and the latest rocket prototype that had exploded during testing last week. Mr. Musk? His assistant Lisa knocked softly on the doorframe. Sorry to interrupt, but you asked me to remind you about dinner. Elon looked up, momentarily confused. Dinner? Yes, sir. With yourself. Lisa smiled. It was their little joke. 3 days ago, he had scheduled dinner with the only person who won't complain about my schedule in his calendar. Elon chuckled, but the sound was hollow. Right. Thanks, Lisa. You can head home now. After she left, Elon walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. Below him, engineers and technicians were still working, their dedication matching his own. Usually, this sight filled him with pride, but tonight something felt different. Empty, somehow. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages. Hundreds of them, from team leaders, board members, government officials, celebrities wanting to hang out. So many messages, yet he couldn't remember the last real conversation he'd had that wasn't about work or publicity. His finger hovered over the contact labeled Mom. When was the last time they'd talked? 3 months ago? 4? He started to tap it, then stopped when his phone buzzed with an incoming email. The subject line caught his eye. A different kind of reset. Normally, he would ignore emails from unknown senders, but something about this one made him open it. The message was brief. Elon, you've created electric cars, reusable rockets, and brain interfaces. You've changed how we move, how we think about space, and how we might connect our minds to computers. But when was the last time you thought about why we're here at all? If you're interested in the biggest question of all, I have an invitation for you. Jack Wells. Jack Wells. The name took Elon back 15 years, to before Tesla, before SpaceX was successful. Jack had been one of the first major investors in his companies, but had suddenly sold all his shares and disappeared from the tech world about 5 years ago. There had been rumors about a health scare, but Elon had been too busy to follow up. Curious, he read on. I'm hosting a small gathering next weekend at my place in the Colorado mountains. No cameras, no press, no pitches, just honest conversation about things that matter. Only 6 people, all of whom value privacy as much as you do. If you're interested, reply to this email. A plane will be waiting at a private airstrip. Come alone. Elon's first instinct was to delete it. He didn't have time for mountain retreats. The new Tesla model was behind schedule. The Mars mission timeline needed revising, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of Jack, always the calmest, wisest voice in board meetings. Maybe it was the unusual emptiness he'd been feeling lately. He hit reply and typed 2 words. I'm interested. 3 days later, Elon's private jet touched down on a small airstrip nestled between towering pine-covered mountains. As he stepped onto the tarmac, the crisp mountain air filled his lungs, a shocking change from the recycled air of his offices and factories. Mr. Musk, welcome to Colorado. A middle-aged man with a friendly face approached, hand extended. I'm Tom, Jack's property manager. He sent me to pick you up. As they walked toward a waiting SUV, Elon noticed a figure at the edge of the tarmac. A boy, maybe 12 or 13, standing perfectly still and watching them. There was something odd about the way the boy stood, too rigid, too focused. Who's that kid? Elon asked. Tom turned to look. What kid? What? But when Elon looked back, the boy was gone. Just the wind rustling through the pines. Never mind, Elon said, shaking his head. Probably just seeing things. I haven't slept much this week. The drive took them higher into the mountains, along roads that grew narrower and more winding. Cell service disappeared, and Elon felt a moment of panic. He was never unreachable. But as they continued, the panic faded, replaced by an unfamiliar sense of relief. Beautiful, isn't it? Tom said, noticing Elon looking out the window. Different from California. Very, Elon agreed. The mountains here weren't just backdrops for expensive homes like in parts of California. They dominated everything, making even someone as powerful as him feel small. After about 40 minutes, they turned onto a gravel driveway marked only by a wooden sign with the number 7. No name, no indication of the wealth that must have gone into the property hidden among the trees. The house, when it came into view, surprised Elon. He'd expected something grand and showy. Jack had always had excellent taste in architecture. Instead, it was a large but modest lodge-style home built of local stone and timber. It looked like it belonged there, like it had grown from the mountain itself. Jack wanted something that would last, not impress, Tom explained, seeing Elon's expression. He's changed a lot in the last few years. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming. A fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows framed views of the forest and mountains beyond. Elon, you actually came. Jack Wells strode into the room, arms outstretched. Elon was shocked by the change in his old friend. The Jack he remembered had been impeccably dressed, clean-shaven, with the polished look of old money. This Jack had a full beard streaked with gray, wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans, and moved with a relaxed energy that the old Jack never had. They hugged, and Elon felt a surprising lump in his throat. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed actual human contact that wasn't a business handshake or a photo opportunity. You look different, Elon said. Jack laughed. Cancer will do that to you. So the rumors were true? Stage 4 pancreatic. They gave me 6 months. Jack smiled at Elon's shocked expression. That was 4 years ago. How? That's a story for later, Jack said, leading Elon further into the house. The others will be arriving soon. Let me show you to your room. The bedroom was simple but comfortable, with the same stunning views as the main room. Elon set down his small overnight bag and noticed a book on the nightstand. It wasn't a Bible as he half expected, but a journal with a note attached. For thoughts too big for phones. J. After freshening up, Elon returned to the main room to find Jack arranging drinks at a small bar. Whiskey, or I've got some excellent non-alcoholic options if you prefer, Jack offered. Whiskey, please. So who else is coming to this retreat? Is that what this is? Jack handed him a glass. Call it whatever you want, and it's a small group. A neuroscientist from MIT, a former Buddhist monk turned tech CEO, a grief counselor who works with terminal patients, and a philosopher who specializes in meaning and purpose. Oh, and Pastor David, who's been helping me make sense of everything. Elon raised an eyebrow. Pastor? Jack, if this is some kind of religious conversion weekend. Jack held up his hands. No hard sell, I promise. David's not that kind of pastor. He asks more questions than he answers. I just thought, well, you've been looking tired in your recent interviews, like something's missing. I'm fine, Elon said automatically. Sure you are. That's why you flew to the middle of nowhere on a cryptic invitation from a guy you haven't seen in years. Jack smiled knowingly. It's okay, Elon. Everyone here is searching for something. Before Elon could reply, they heard cars pulling up outside. That'll be the others, Jack said, heading for the door. Left alone for a moment, Elon walked to the windows. The sun was setting behind the mountains now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Far below, at the edge of the tree line, a small figure stood looking up at the house. The boy from the airstrip. Even from this distance, Elon could feel the intensity of the boy's stare. A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Elon, come meet everyone, Jack called from the entryway. When Elon looked back at the trees, the boy was gone. Coming, he called back, shaking off the strange feeling. It was probably just a local kid, curious about the visitors to this remote place. Nothing to worry about. But as he turned to greet the other guests, Elon couldn't quite shake the feeling that something very unusual was about to happen. Something that might change everything. The next morning, Elon woke to sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. No phone alerts, no assistants knocking, no urgent messages demanding his attention. Just silence and mountain air. He reached for his phone by habit, then remembered. There was no cell service here. Jack had mentioned a satellite connection in the main house for emergencies, but had suggested everyone disconnect for the weekend. When was the last time you were truly unreachable? Jack had asked last night as they'd sat around the large dining table, sharing a meal that Tom had prepared before leaving. Elon couldn't remember. Even on vacation, his team always knew how to reach him. Always. He got up and looked out the window. The view was even more spectacular in the morning light. Pine trees stretched down the mountainside, and beyond them, snow-capped peaks rose against a perfect blue sky. Something moved at the edge of the forest. A deer, maybe? But no, it was too tall, too straight. The boy again, just standing there looking up. Elon opened the window. "Hey, kid, what are you doing?" The boy didn't move or respond. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and pointed. Not at Elon, but at something in the sky behind the house. Elon turned to look but saw nothing unusual. When he looked back, the boy was gone. Unsettled, Elon showered and dressed, then headed to the main room where the smell of coffee drew him in. "Morning," Jack called from an open kitchen area where he was flipping pancakes. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Elon admitted. "Where is everyone?" "Beth and Dr. Wu are on the back deck doing Tai Chi. Raj is meditating in his room. And Pastor David went for a hike at dawn, said something about morning prayers on the mountain." Elon poured himself coffee. "About this pastor?" Jack smiled knowingly. "Still worried about the God Squad? Relax. David isn't here to convert anyone. He's a thinker, like you." "I'm just not sure why you included him," Elon said, accepting a plate of pancakes. Jack's face grew serious. "When I got sick, I tried everything. Experimental treatments, ancient healing methods, diets, you name it. Nothing worked. The cancer kept spreading. Then one day, feeling pretty sorry for myself, I wandered into a small church in Colorado Springs. Not to pray, just to sit somewhere quiet." He flipped another pancake, gathering his thoughts. "David was there, not preaching, just reading. We got talking. About life, death, purpose. He didn't try to sell me on Jesus or promise miracles. He just listened, asked questions I'd never considered. It changed something in me." Jack tapped his chest. "In here. My scans still showed cancer, but I stopped being afraid, started living differently." "And that's when you got better?" Elon asked skeptically. "No, that's when I accepted I might die and found peace with it. The healing came later and shocked my doctors as much as me." Jack shrugged. "Maybe it was one of the treatments finally working. Maybe it was something else. I don't claim to know. But I do know I'm not the same person I was before I got sick." Before Elon could respond, the glass doors to the deck slid open and two people entered. A small Asian man who moved with graceful precision, and a tall woman with curly gray hair and kind eyes. "Ah, the famous Elon Musk," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Beth Chen, grief counselor and reluctant social media user. My kids made me watch your Saturday Night Live appearance. You were funnier than I expected." Elon shook her hand, surprised by her frankness. "Thanks, I think." The Asian man bowed slightly. "Dr. Henry Wu. Neuroscience. Your Neuralink project fascinates me, though I have questions about your approach to the blood-brain barrier." "Henry, we agreed. No work talk until tomorrow." Jack chided gently. "Apologies," Dr. Wu said with a small smile. "Old habits." They were soon joined by Raj, a former monk with a ready laugh who immediately began teasing Jack about his pancakes. Pastor David returned from his hike shortly after, his weathered face flushed with exertion. "The sunrise from Eagle Point is worth every step," he announced, accepting coffee from Jack. He nodded to Elon. "Good to meet you, Mr. Musk." "Jack speaks highly of you." "Just Elon is fine," he replied, studying the pastor. David was younger than he'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything. He didn't have the polished look Elon associated with TV preachers or the stern demeanor of the ministers from his South African childhood. After breakfast, they gathered in a circle of comfortable chairs in the main room. Jack explained that they would spend the weekend discussing big questions, purpose, meaning, mortality, faith, in an open and honest way. No recording devices, no social media posts, no judgment, he said. Just real talk about things most of us are too busy to think about. And why exactly do we need to think about these things? Elon asked, still not entirely sure why he'd come. Because we're human, Beth said simply. And humans need meaning like we need water. Some would say these questions are luxury items, Elon countered. We should focus on survival first, climate change, sustainable energy, becoming multiplanetary, the big existential risks. An interesting perspective, Pastor David nodded. But I wonder, why do we want to survive at all? What makes human life worth preserving? The question caught Elon off guard. He'd spent years working on technologies to help humanity survive, but rarely stopped to articulate why that mattered. Because consciousness is rare in the universe, he said finally. Intelligence even rarer. It seems wasteful to let it die out. So we preserve humanity for efficiency's sake? David asked, not challenging but genuinely curious. No, that's not what I meant, Elon frowned. We preserve it because it has value. And where does that value come from? The conversation flowed from there, weaving through philosophy, science, personal experience. To Elon's surprise, Pastor David asked more questions than he answered, seeming genuinely interested in everyone's perspective. There was none of the dogmatic certainty Elon had expected. As the day progressed, they moved to the deck for lunch, then took a short hike to a nearby overlook. Throughout it all, the discussion continued. Dr. Wu spoke about the neuroscience of belief and meaning. Raj shared how meditation had transformed his understanding of consciousness. Beth told moving stories of patients finding peace in their final days. Many people think they know what matters, she said as they sat on rocks overlooking a valley. Then they get a terminal diagnosis, and everything shifts. Suddenly, it's not about achievements or possessions. It's about love, forgiveness, meaning. But isn't that just human psychology? Elon asked. We tell ourselves comforting stories when faced with the inevitable. Perhaps, Pastor David said. Or perhaps getting close to death burns away the distractions and lets us see what was always most important. Throughout the day, Elon found himself opening up more than he had in years. These people had no agenda with him. They weren't seeking funding or connections or publicity. They just wanted to talk, to exchange ideas, to understand. It was refreshing. Liberating even. As the sun began to set, they returned to the house for dinner. Afterwards, Pastor David suggested they share their personal journeys, what had brought each of them to their current understanding of life's meaning. Elon, would you mind if I share a bit of your story? Jack asked. Just the public parts, your journey from South Africa to where you are now. I guess that's fine, Elon said, slightly uncomfortable with being the center of attention in this context. Jack recounted Elon's well-known history, his difficult childhood, his early success with Zip2 and PayPal, the near bankruptcies with Tesla and SpaceX, the eventual triumphs. What strikes me about your story, Pastor David said when Jack finished, is the persistence through almost impossible odds. What kept you going when both companies were days from collapse? Elon thought for a moment. I believe the work mattered. Electric cars, space exploration, they're essential for humanity's future. I couldn't let them fail if there was any way to save them. Faith, David said quietly. Not religious faith, Elon clarified quickly. No, but faith nonetheless. Belief in something you couldn't prove at the time but felt certain was true and important. David leaned forward. I'm curious. What gives your life meaning now, Elon? With all you've achieved, what drives you? Before Elon could answer, a movement outside the window caught his eye. The strange boy again standing just at the edge of the firelight spilling from the house. This time Elon was sure the others would see him too. But when he pointed, the boy was already melting back into the darkness. There's a kid out there, Elon said. I've seen him several times now. Jack looked concerned. There are no children nearby. The closest neighbor is 5 miles away. I know what I saw, Elon insisted. Pastor David studied Elon's face carefully. Sometimes, when we open ourselves to deeper questions, we become aware of things we've overlooked before. You think, I'm imagining things? Not at all, David smiled. I think you might be starting to see more clearly. That night, Elon couldn't sleep. The conversations from the day kept playing in his mind. Questions he'd brushed aside for years now demanded attention. What was it all for? The companies, the innovations, the race to Mars. What was the point, if not part of some larger purpose? Around 2 a.m., he gave up on sleep and pulled on a jacket. Maybe some fresh air would clear his head. The main room was dark and quiet as he passed through, but a faint glow came from the kitchen. Pastor David sat at the island reading by the light of a single lamp. Trouble sleeping? David asked, closing his book. Elon nodded. Too many thoughts. That happens here, David smiled. Coffee? It's decaf. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, sipping coffee and looking out at the moonlit mountains through the windows. Can I ask you something? Elon said finally. Something I've wondered about faith. Of course. If God exists and created everything, who created God? David chuckled. Starting with an easy one, I see. It's always bothered me, Elon admitted. It seems like a logical problem. Everything needs a cause, so what caused God? That assumes God exists within the same framework of time and causality as we do, David said. But if God created time itself, then asking what came before God is like asking what's north of the North Pole. Elon considered this. So God exists outside of time? I believe so. Not once upon a time there was God, but rather, God is the timeless ground of all being. David took a sip of coffee. But I understand the difficulty. Our brains evolved to think in terms of cause and effect, beginnings and endings. Contemplating something beyond those categories is like trying to visualize a 4-dimensional object, which we can only see as a 3-dimensional shadow. Elon nodded, familiar with the concept. Exactly. Our understanding of ultimate reality might be similarly limited. David paused. But I'm curious, why does this question matter to you? Elon looked out at the mountains, gathering his thoughts. I've spent my life trying to understand how things work, trying to build a better future. But lately I've been wondering if I'm missing something fundamental. Like I've been so focused on the how that I've ignored the why. The why is where faith lives, David said quietly. They talked for another hour, moving from theoretical questions to more personal ones. David shared his own journey, from a childhood in a strict religious household, through a period of atheism in college, to a gradual return to faith that was both simpler and deeper than what he'd started with. Not everyone finds their way back, David said. And that's okay. The journey matters more than the destination. But you believe there is a right destination, Elon pointed out. David smiled. I believe there's truth, yes, but I also believe it's bigger than any one person's understanding of it. As dawn approached, Elon finally felt tired enough to sleep. He thanked David for the conversation and headed back to his room. But as he passed a window, he saw the boy again, standing in the exact same spot where he'd seen him the previous evening, as if he hadn't moved all night. This time, instead of vanishing, the boy raised his hand in a clear gesture, pointing at his wrist where a watch would be. A warning, a reminder? Elon couldn't tell. The second full day at the retreat began with a group breakfast, followed by what Jack called solo reflection time. Each person found a private spot on the property to think, journal, or meditate on the previous day's discussions. Elon hiked to a small clearing with a view of the valley. He sat on a fallen log and opened the journal Jack had given him, surprised to find himself actually writing, something he rarely did by hand anymore. He wrote about purpose, about the feeling that his work mattered but somehow wasn't enough, about the emptiness that success hadn't filled. about the questions that kept surfacing despite his attempts to bury them in 100-hour work weeks. When he returned to the house for lunch, something had shifted inside him. He couldn't name it exactly. A softening, perhaps. An openness to possibilities he'd previously dismissed. The afternoon session focused on personal experiences that had shaped each person's worldview. Beth spoke movingly about a patient whose forgiveness of an estranged father had brought peace in his final days. Dr. Wu described a near-death experience during surgery that had defied his scientific understanding. Raj told of a moment during meditation when the boundary between himself and the world had seemed to dissolve. When it was David's turn, he surprised everyone. Many people expect dramatic conversion stories from pastors, he said. But mine was quiet. I was sitting in a physics lecture, of all places, listening to a professor explain the fine-tuning of universal constants. How if gravity were even slightly stronger or weaker, if the strong nuclear force differed by a tiny fraction, life could never have emerged. David's eyes grew distant with the memory. The professor, an atheist, called it a fortunate accident. But sitting there, I felt something click into place. The universe suddenly looked less like a random accident and more like a finely calibrated instrument. I didn't hear voices or see visions. I just knew with a certainty that surprised me that there was purpose behind it all. Elon found himself nodding. The fine-tuning problem was one he'd encountered in his reading. While many scientists invoked the multiverse to explain it, he'd always felt that was just pushing the question back a level. "What about you, Elon?" Jack asked. "Any moments that shaped your view of existence?" Elon thought for a moment. "When I was around 20, I went through what you might call an existential crisis. I read a lot of philosophy, trying to figure out what would give life meaning. I eventually settled on the idea that working to ensure humanity becomes a multiplanetary species, to extend consciousness into the universe, that was a purpose worth dedicating my life to." "And now?" David asked gently. "Now? I'm not sure that's enough." Elon looked around the circle. "Don't get me wrong, I still think it's crucial work. But if it's all just random, if consciousness is just a brief flicker in a meaningless universe, I don't know. It starts to feel hollow." A thoughtful silence fell over the group. "Perhaps," David suggested, "the work you're doing has more meaning than you realized. If consciousness is valuable, as you said yesterday, and if there's purpose behind the universe, then extending the reach of consciousness could be a deeply spiritual endeavor." The idea resonated with Elon in an unexpected way. He'd always seen his companies as important, but primarily in practical terms, solving environmental problems, advancing human capabilities, ensuring species survival. The notion that this work might connect to something larger, something beyond the material universe, was both strange and compelling. As evening approached, the group moved to the back deck where Jack had prepared a fire pit. They sat in Adirondack chairs around the crackling flames, continuing their conversation as stars appeared in the darkening sky. The discussion turned to what it meant to live a good life, to make choices aligned with deeper purpose. Each person shared struggles and insights from their own experience. "The hardest part," Beth said, "is living what you believe day to day. Grand purpose is one thing, but how does it shape ordinary moments?" Elon thought about his own life, the relentless pace, the focus on goals and deadlines, the sacrifices of relationships and personal time. Had he been living in alignment with what mattered most? He wasn't sure anymore. As the fire burned lower and the conversation grew more personal, Elon felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. These people had become friends in just 2 days, real friends who cared about his thoughts and feelings, not his money or influence. When Pastor David suggested they close the evening with a simple prayer, Elon surprised himself by not objecting. He didn't pray himself, but he listened respectfully as David offered thanks for their time together and asked for wisdom and clarity. Later, as the group dispersed to their rooms, David pulled Elon aside. "Tomorrow morning, before everyone else is up, I'm going to hold a small sunrise service on Eagle Point. Nothing formal, just a chance to welcome the day with gratitude. You'd be welcome to join." Elon hesitated, then nodded. I think I'd like that. Back in his room, Elon sat on the edge of his bed, processing the day. Something was happening to him here, something unexpected. The cynical part of him wanted to dismiss it as emotional manipulation or group psychology, but the scientist in him had to admit the evidence. He felt different, calmer, more whole. He made a decision. Tomorrow at the sunrise service, he would take a step he'd never imagined taking. He would open himself to the possibility of faith, to the idea that there might be more to existence than what could be measured or built or coded. As he prepared for bed, he glanced out the window one last time. The strange boy was there again, closer to the house than before. In the moonlight, Elon could make out his face clearly for the first time, intense eyes, an expression too serious for someone so young. The boy shook his head slowly, as if in warning or disapproval. Then he pointed to the sky and made a slashing motion across his throat. A chill ran down Elon's spine. What was the boy trying to tell him? But exhaustion was finally catching up with him. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he would try to talk to the boy, to understand what was happening. For now he needed sleep. He had an early morning appointment with a sunrise and, perhaps with God. Elon's alarm woke him at 5 a.m. Outside, the world was still dark, though a faint glow on the horizon hinted at the coming sunrise. He dressed quickly in warm layers and headed to the kitchen where Pastor David waited with 2 thermoses of coffee. "Ready for a hike?" David asked with a smile. They set out on a narrow trail that wound up the mountainside, their way lit by headlamps. The pre-dawn air was crisp and cold, their breath forming clouds in the beam of light. They walked mostly in silence, focused on the path and their own thoughts. As they climbed, Elon found himself unusually aware of his surroundings. The crunch of pine needles underfoot, the occasional hoot of an owl, the way the stars slowly faded as the sky lightened. He rarely took time to notice such things in his normal life. "Almost there," David said, as they reached a steeper section. Just around this bend, Eagle Point turned out to be a flat rock outcropping that jutted from the mountainside, offering a panoramic view of the valley below and the mountains beyond. To the east, the sky was beginning to blush pink and gold. David set down his backpack and pulled out a small blanket which he spread on the rock. "A bit more comfortable for sitting," he explained, "though there's something fitting about hard stone for contemplation." They sat side by side, watching as the light grew stronger. David pointed out various peaks and features of the landscape, naming them with the familiarity of someone who had come here many times. "This is my favorite place in the world," he said. "Something about the vastness, the beauty. It helps put things in perspective." Elon nodded, understanding. The view was spectacular, layer upon layer of mountains fading into the distance, valleys still shadowed in pre-dawn darkness, a hawk circling on rising thermals below them. "In a few minutes, the sun will hit that distant peak first," David said, pointing. "Then it will sweep across the valley toward us. It happens the same way every morning, yet it never feels routine to me." As predicted, a golden light touched the farthest mountain, then began its journey across the landscape. David opened his thermos and poured coffee into 2 small cups, handing one to Elon. "This is my sunrise service," he said. "No hymns, no sermon, just gratitude for another day, another chance to get it right." They sipped their coffee in companionable silence as the light continued its progress. When the sun finally crested the horizon, flooding the outcropping with warmth and light, David spoke again. "This is usually when I pray," he said. "Nothing formal, just opening my heart to whatever might be listening." Elon hesitated, then asked, "Would you mind if I joined you?" David looked pleased. "Not at all." He closed his eyes, and after a moment, Elon did the same. The sun warm on his face, Elon listened as David spoke simple words of thanks for the day, for their time together, for the beauty around them. Then there was silence. Elon wasn't sure how to pray, or even if he was praying. But he found himself filled with a sense of gratitude and openness. If there was something greater out there, some intelligence or consciousness behind existence, he was willing to listen now. A sound broke the silence, a scuffing of shoes on rock. Elon opened his eyes to see the strange boy standing at the edge of the outcropping barely 10 feet away. "David," Elon said quietly, not wanting to startle the boy. "Look." The pastor opened his eyes and turned. His expression showed surprise but not alarm. "Hello there," he said gently. "You're up early." The boy didn't respond. He was about 12 or 13, Elon guessed, with dark hair and intense eyes that seemed older than his face. He wore simple clothes, jeans, a gray sweatshirt, sneakers. Nothing unusual except for their pristine condition. "I've seen you watching the house," Elon said. "Who are you?" Still the boy said nothing. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device unlike anything Elon had ever seen. Sleek, slightly translucent with no visible buttons or screen. "What is that?" Elon asked, his interest piqued. The boy looked at David, then back at Elon. Finally, he spoke, his voice clear and strangely accented. "My name is Elias, and you're in danger." David stood slowly. "What kind of danger?" "Not you," the boy, Elias said, eyes fixed on Elon. "Him. All of his work. His purpose." Elon stood too, intrigued despite his skepticism. "What are you talking about? Who are you really?" "There isn't much time," Elias said. "The service starts at 9. That's when you'll make your decision. But you need to know the truth first." "What service?" David asked, looking confused. "We don't have anything planned until this afternoon." "Not your plan. Theirs." Elias looked back at Elon. "You came here questioning, searching. That's what they counted on." "They? Who's they?" Elon was growing frustrated. "Look, kid, if this is some kind of prank—" "Jack Wells isn't who you think he is," Elias cut in. "None of them are." An uncomfortable silence fell. David's face showed concern now. "That's a serious accusation," he said carefully. "Jack is my friend. I've known him for years." "Have you?" Elias asked. "Or have you known a carefully constructed persona?" Something in the boy's tone made Elon pause. There was an authority there, a certainty that didn't match his apparent age. "Prove it," Elon said. "If Jack is hiding something, prove it." Elias held up the strange device. "This can access information they've tried to hide, but I need your permission to show you." Elon glanced at David, who looked troubled but nodded slightly. "Show me," Elon said. Elias pressed something on the device. Instantly, a holographic display appeared in the air between them, far more advanced than any technology Elon had seen. Images and text floated, rearranged, connected by lines of light. "Jack Wells died 3 years ago," Elias said, pointing to what appeared to be a death certificate. "Pancreatic cancer, as he told you. But this man—" He swiped to show a photo of the Jack that Elon had been talking with for the past 2 days. "Is Thomas Reeves, former psychological operations specialist for a private military contractor." The display shifted again, showing what appeared to be military records, news articles, photographs. The others have similar backgrounds. The retreat, the spiritual discussions. It's all designed to guide you toward a specific decision, to accept a version of faith that would change the direction of your companies, your influence. "That's absurd," David said, but he sounded less certain now. "Why would anyone go to such lengths?" "Because of what he builds," Elias nodded toward Elon. "His work threatens powerful interests, autonomous AI, space colonization, neural interfaces. These could shift control away from those who've held it for generations. So they want me to, what? Abandon my companies? My projects?" Elon asked, struggling to make sense of the accusation. "No. They want you to filter your work through a specific worldview, one that ensures certain technologies develop in ways they can control or limit." Elias's eyes were intense. "The version of faith they're offering isn't wrong because it's faith. It's wrong because it's being weaponized." Elon looked at the holographic display, then at David. "You're part of this?" David's face showed genuine distress. No. At least, I don't think so. He turned to Elias. I was invited here by Jack, or Thomas, if what you're saying is true. I thought it was just a retreat for people asking big questions. You were chosen, carefully, Elias said. Your sincerity makes you the perfect voice for their message. They're using you too. Elon's mind was racing. The retreat had felt so genuine. The conversations had touched him deeply. Could it all be manipulation? Who are you? He asked Elias again. How do you know all this? The boy hesitated. I'm from somewhere else, somewhere that has a vested interest in humanity's development taking a different path. Another country? An organization? Further than that? Elias glanced at the sky. Much further. Elon's eyes widened as understanding dawned. You're claiming to be… what? Not human? Not from this time, at least. Elias looked uncomfortable for the first time. I've already said more than I should. David laughed, the sound slightly strained. This is getting bizarre. You expect us to believe you're a time traveler? An alien? I expect you to investigate what I've shown you, Elias said, unperturbed. To question what's happening here before making choices that can't be undone. He manipulated the device again, and the holographic display vanished. In its place appeared what looked like a simple thumb drive. This contains enough evidence to verify what I've told you. News articles that don't exist yet but will if certain choices are made. Records of organizations that operate in shadows. He held it out to Elon, who took it cautiously. I have to go now, Elias said, backing toward the trail. They'll know. I've interfered. But remember, what matters isn't whether you embrace faith or reject it. What matters is that the choice is truly yours, not engineered by others with their own agenda. With that, he turned and disappeared down the path, moving with surprising speed. Elon and David stood in stunned silence for a long moment, the rising sun now fully illuminating the outcropping. The peaceful mood of earlier was shattered. What just happened? David finally asked. Elon looked at the small drive in his hand. I don't know, but I intend to find out. He turned to head back down the mountain, his mind already analyzing possibilities, weighing evidence, forming hypotheses. The clarity he'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by a familiar determination. If someone was trying to manipulate him, for whatever reason, they had chosen the wrong target. Elon and David hurried back down the mountain, the peaceful mood of sunrise forgotten. Neither spoke much, both lost in their own thoughts about Elias's strange claims. When they reached the house, it was still quiet. No one else was awake yet. I need to check this, Elon said, holding up the small drive Elias had given him. Is there a computer here? David nodded. In Jack's study. But Elon, are we really taking this seriously? A boy who claims to be from the future? I'm not jumping to conclusions either way, Elon replied. But something unusual is happening here. I want to see what's on this drive. They found the study, a cozy room lined with bookshelves and featuring a large wooden desk with a laptop. Elon sat down and turned on the computer. It's password protected, he muttered, looking at the login screen. Try Eagle Point, David suggested. Jack mentioned once it was his favorite place. To their surprise, it worked. The desktop appeared, normal-looking, with folders for documents, photos, and work. Elon inserted the drive. A single folder appeared, labeled simply Truth. Inside were dozens of files, documents, images, videos. Elon clicked on one labeled Real Identity, Jack Wells. A death certificate appeared, just as Elias had shown them on the mountainside. Jack Wells died 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer. Next to it was a military personnel file for Thomas Reeves, with a photo that unmistakably showed the man they knew as Jack. This could be fake, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. Elon opened more files. Records of an organization called the Horizon Initiative, financial transactions, email exchanges, plans for what was called Operation Shepherd, with Elon's name prominently featured. One document outlined the goal. Subject must be guided to embrace a specific theological framework that will inform his future technology development, particularly in AI ethics and space colonization. The altered course will create necessary limitations without subject feeling externally controlled. I don't know what to say, David whispered, reading over Elon's shoulder. If this is real, that's what we need to determine, Elon said, copying files to examine later. A video file caught his eye, labeled Rehearsal. He clicked it. The video showed Jack Thomas in what looked like a conference room, speaking to unseen listeners. Remember, we need authentic connection. Musk is extremely intelligent and will detect obvious manipulation. The key is to create genuine emotional experiences that lead to the desired outcome. Pastor David's involvement is crucial. His sincerity is our best asset. David stepped back, his face pale. I don't understand. I've known Jack for years. We've prayed together, shared meals, talked about deeply personal things. Or someone who looks like Jack, Elon said grimly, continuing to search through files. He found a folder labeled Pastor David and hesitated before opening it. Inside was a psychological profile, details about David's background, and notes about why he'd been selected. Subject genuinely believes what he preaches. No knowledge of the operation. Will serve as the authentic voice that gives credibility to our message. David sat heavily in a nearby chair. So I'm just a pawn, being used to manipulate you. It seems that way, Elon said, feeling a strange mix of anger and disappointment, the spiritual opening he'd experienced over the past days. Was it all just carefully orchestrated manipulation? A noise from elsewhere in the house made them both freeze. Someone's up, David whispered. Elon quickly ejected the drive and pocketed it. Act normal. We need time to figure this out. They left the study just as Beth emerged from her room, yawning. Good morning, you two are up early. Sunrise hike, David explained, his voice impressively steady despite his obvious distress. Coffee's ready in the kitchen if you want some. Over. The next hour, the rest of the group awoke and gathered for breakfast. Elon watched them all carefully now, looking for signs of deception. Jack Thomas was particularly interesting to observe. The man was completely at ease, sharing stories, and laughing. If he was playing a role, he was extraordinarily good at it. After breakfast, Jack announced the day's plan. This morning, we'll have some group discussion. Then after lunch, Pastor David has offered to lead a special service for anyone who's interested. Nothing formal, just a chance to reflect on what we've experienced this weekend. David caught Elon's eye. This must be the service Elias had mentioned. The moment when Elon was supposed to make his decision to embrace faith. A decision that, according to the files, would subtly influence the development of his companies for years to come. Before we start, Elon said, making a split-second decision, I'd like to share something. The room grew quiet, all eyes turning to him. I've been thinking a lot about authenticity, Elon began, about the difference between what's real and what's constructed. In technology, we call it simulation versus reality. He looked directly at Jack. What would you say is the difference, Jack? Or should I call you Thomas? The room went completely still. Jack's face showed only mild confusion, but Elon noticed a slight tensing of his shoulders. I'm sorry? Jack said with a puzzled smile. What are you talking about? Elon pulled out the drive. This morning, a boy named Elias gave me this. It contains some very interesting information about this retreat, about all of you. The change in the room was immediate and unmistakable. Raj and Dr. Wu exchanged glances. Beth's friendly expression hardened into something more calculating. Elon, Jack said, his voice carefully controlled. I don't know what you think you found, but Thomas Reeves. Elon cut him off. Former psychological operations specialist, expert in behavior modification and belief system engineering, currently working for something called the Horizon Initiative. A new tension filled the room. No one spoke. The real Jack Wells died 3 years ago, Elon continued. I'm curious. Did you choose to impersonate him because of his connection to me, or was it just convenient that he had terminal cancer so his miraculous recovery would seem more spiritual? Jack Thomas's friendly mask slipped completely. His eyes grew cold, assessing. How did you get this information? He asked, not bothering to deny the accusation. Does it matter? Elon shot back. What matters is why. Why go to all this trouble? What's so important about how I think about faith? Jack glanced at the others, then sighed. You're at a tipping point, Elon. Your companies, your influence, they could change everything. The direction you take matters. To who? Who's behind this? People who understand the big picture, the long view. Jack leaned forward. Your work with AI, your plans for Mars, these things will shape humanity's future. If those technologies develop without certain guardrails, the risks are enormous. So this was all manipulation, Elon said, looking around the room at people he'd begun to think of as friends. The conversations, the insights, the connections, all fake. Not fake, David said quietly. He alone seemed genuinely shaken by the revelations, at least not from me. I had no idea about any of this. Jack nodded. David is innocent. We needed someone authentic, someone who truly believes. To make the lie more convincing, Elon finished. To show you something real, Jack countered. Faith itself isn't the lie, Elon. The context was adjusted. Elon stood up, suddenly tired of the whole charade. I'm leaving. Now. That would be unwise, Dr. Wu said, his gentle demeanor replaced by something harder. The information you have is sensitive. Are you threatening me? Elon asked, incredulous. Simply stating a fact, Wu replied. The situation was deteriorating. Quickly. Elon looked to David, the only other person who seemed to be on his side. I think we should both go. David nodded and stood. Wait, Jack said, his tone conciliatory. Let's talk this through. What you found is only part of the story. There are bigger concerns at play. I'm sure there are, Elon said, and I'll be looking into all of them. But not here. Not with you. He and David moved toward the door. No one tried to physically stop them, but the tension was palpable. Think about what we discussed, Elon. Jack called after them. About purpose, about meaning. Those questions are still valid, even if our methods weren't. Elon paused at the door. That's the problem with manipulation. It poisons everything it touches, even truth. Outside, they hurried to the cars parked at the side of the house. My keys are inside, David said. We'll take mine, Elon replied, pulling out his phone to call his driver. Within minutes, they were heading down the mountain road, leaving the retreat behind. Neither spoke for a long time, both processing what had happened. Finally, David broke the silence. I feel like such a fool. They used me to get to you. You weren't the only one fooled, Elon said. I was ready to, change my entire worldview based on what happened up there. The thing is, David said carefully, some of what we discussed, the questions about purpose, about meaning, those things still matter. They're still real questions, even if the context was manipulated. Elon nodded slowly. I know, and I'm not dismissing them, but now I need to find my own answers, not ones that someone else wants me to have for their own agenda. They drove in silence for a while longer, the mountains gradually giving way to foothills. What about Elias? David asked eventually. Who do you think he really was? Elon thought about the strange boy, his unusual knowledge, his advanced technology. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. He pulled the drive from his pocket, looking at it thoughtfully. There's more on here than just information about the retreat. Things that point to bigger players, bigger stakes. So what now? David asked. Now I go back to my companies, back to my work. Elon's face set with determination. But with my eyes more open. If what was on that drive is true, there are powerful people very interested in the direction of my projects. I need to understand why and what they're afraid of. As they approached civilization again, cell service returned. Elon's phone buzzed with dozens of missed calls and messages, the real world rushing back in. But something had changed in him. The questions awakened during the retreat remained, even if the answers offered there had been part of someone else's agenda. The search for meaning, for purpose beyond the material world, that journey was just beginning, and somewhere out there was a boy named Elias, with knowledge and technology that shouldn't exist. Another mystery to solve. Elon smiled slightly. If there was one thing he was good at, it was solving problems that others thought impossible. I think, he said to David, this is just the beginning of a much bigger story.